this is, you need to be able to communicate even when you're under fire and you're trying to just hold everything down. Is like, how can you communicate to a team because they're looking for you to lead them.
Yeah. I think we've got a question here around if you've got a bad experience with a manager, what is something you never do?
I'll pass over to Jonathan. If you had any bad manager experience, you said you had some bad manager. What did you do?
Yeah. Maybe calling them bad manager is not fair, but it just didn't work for me, right? But yeah, no, I think just echoing, some of what Britney has shared about micromanagement, failure to communicate. I think feedback is critical, and a lot of managers, unfortunately, are terrible at giving feedback. Some of them are really good at like when it's negative feedback. So first of all, I think there should never be negative feedback. It should always be constructive, right? So here's what you could have done better. I think that's very helpful. But then also, I think one big thing that's huge, and again, in a space as political as ours, is as a manager, especially if people confide in you. I think just that trust. There's a lot of gossip that goes around. I think in consulting, and to me, that's fine if sort of like people at junior levels are doing that. But unfortunately, a lot of managers are part of that, right? And when there's that power dynamic, and there's also the gospel around, I think it creates just a terrible sort of environment for people to work in. But one thing to never do, I think, when you have a bad experience with a manager, very related to sort of what I shared about gossip, is I think you owe it to them there's something to be said about managing up, right? And it's easy not to think of ourselves, like especially in junior positions, as managers, but you are a manager, right? You're managing your manager's expectations, you're managing yourself. And I think just that expectation management is critical. So if you haven't had the conversation about, this was a bad experience, here's why I think that happened with your manager. One thing that sometimes people do is go above the manager, right? Whoever their own boss is, to sort of like try and spoil. And if you haven't had that conversation, I think that's counterproductive, right? And so I think you owe it, in a weird way, like think of yourself as a manager of your manager, right? And it's possible to give them constructive feedback. And so just respecting the chains, especially initially, right? Respecting the chains of command that exist, no matter how terrible they are. Because I think what that also does, if you do need to escalate, it shows that you've done the work, right? You've tried to work it out as mandated in the handbook or by, the organizational structure. But I've seen many people, especially if they have a relationship with senior managers, try that power play, and that just ends up being, and it very rarely ends well.
Yeah, yes. I'd say that it doesn't. I think managing up is a big thing that people always talk about. It's really hard, and I think it's important that you just realize it's about expectation, it's about communicating back the other way. If you can't do something, rather than then not doing it because you could never do it in the first place, you didn't have the knowledge, you weren't given the right amount of time. You have to be able to communicate early to that. This is not something that I think I can do. Can we find some other way? Rather than leaving to the last minute where everything explodes and then trying to pick up the pieces and pointing fingers. Regarding this, I don't think it's ever good to scoot around and it's important to respect this chain of command. But also, you can feel free to go to other people to ask for advice. Other people. So if you're having a hard time with your manager, ask someone else, maybe not unrelated to the project, but someone else in a management position saying, I'm having a hard time. I think it's still important to say, and not to point fingers and saying they're a bad manager, but just saying, I'm having a hard time dealing with this. Can you lend me some advice? I think it's not necessarily circumventing another person, but it's definitely showing that you're trying to get the best end result possible. And I think that's actually key to any hard times that people have is objectifying the issue. Is that, if you're having a hard time, this is not a personal issue between me and the manager. This is about us trying to reach the end goal, make our clients happy, achieve X amount of revenue, or, whatever that is. This is our mission. We're trying to get here. At the moment, we're having a bit of a problem. How do we overcome it? Is a much better way to phrase any sort of political debate in a company. I think that the thing that you should never do is make it personal. If I don't want to be on this project anymore, well, I don't like it. I'm not having a good time. I don't like the people. That's never going to fly in a consultant organization where everybody's working for something else. But to say that actually, I feel like my skills are best used somewhere else, and it just so happens that someone else is really demanding those skills right now and needs me to join the project. That's how you get off. That's how you get off the project. High demand. Someone needs me right now. I can't say no. Like they've shown the bat signal over there. I have to run. That's the sort of way you get off projects.
That's really important.
Yeah.
Like, I just want to re-emphasize that when you leave a job, when you leave a project, I don't care what you're leaving, focus on where you're going next and how people are going to support you in doing the next thing rather than all the things you're leaving behind. You don't want to be, even if you're running from something, don't communicate you're running from something. People won't respect that. Tell us what you're running towards, what you're excited about next, and ask us to support you in doing that thing. No nice person will say, no, I don't want to support you in doing this thing that you care about or want to learn or want to grow in. Sorry, I had to jump in. I was like, this is...
I know, it's good. Yeah, I'm glad you did. Glad you did. Do we have any other questions? Let's see.
I think we had a question about when you're feeling overwhelmed, and I think this year we saw a lot of it, how we might want to communicate that to a team or a manager. And I think for me, it comes down to you have to build those relationships where you've got trust, right? Whether it's your teammates and your peers or your manager, but you've got to communicate early, because if I'm feeling overwhelmed, it may impact my ability to deliver on time. And surprises are the things we want to avoid most in this world, right? Clients don't do well with surprises. So I think when you can communicate early and often, and hey, I'm feeling overwhelmed and here's what I need. I need to step back for 2 hours. I need to step back for 2 days. I need an additional hand on this part of my project. But, communicate it and then ask for what you need and stick to that as much as possible.
Yeah, I think just reiterating what Britney said about early and often, I think is critical. No manager wants to find out, that you were overwhelmed and couldn't do the work, like 2 hours before the deliverable is due, right? So I think just doing that early and often, but I think it's also important to prioritize yourself, especially given what we're all going through right now and just how much of a toll it's been on mental health. I think for those of us who are, Black in the United States, but also, if you're in Nigeria or wherever you are, also it's been an especially hard time for Black people for the past 2 years, right? So I think, hopefully you have a manager that understands and you have that relationship, as Brittany mentioned. But I think over communicating and doing that as early as possible is critical, right? Because even if your manager wants to help you, you may have a client that does not get that. So giving them the skills to be able to give you the information to be able to give you the resources that you need to meet the deadline, I think is critical.
Yeah, absolutely. People can't fix problems they don't know about. So I think it's about sometimes they can't be fixed, and that's really hard. That you have to push on through, or someone else has to pick up the workload. That can happen too. But if you over communicate, I believe that's the very best way. Maybe just moving on finally in the last 4 or 5 minutes, but just talking about getting to the C-suite. So what does it take to get to the top?
I can jump in with some thoughts. So I think when you're getting to the top of your organization, there's a couple things to keep in mind, right? So one, you have to absolutely know what's important. And in most businesses, it's going to be driving the product, driving some sort of sales, right? Or delivering. So coming through and say, I've built a book of business, I've maintained a client relationship, right? You're not dependent on someone else's relationship to sell. You can basically build a book of business and then staff people behind you, right? So how are you helping other people pay their bills or pay their mortgage and in a stable and dependable way, right? So building a practice area, for example, that's what they'll want to see as leaders. I think the other big thing, especially as we get more senior, is being able to tell other leaders at the firm what we need to be doing or how we need to do something differently, right? Identify the gaps, identify the opportunities, and then go fill them, right? It's not just talking about it and identifying. I'd say a great senior manager can identify a gap. I'd say at the MD level, you better be filling the gaps too, right? Because now you're thinking like an owner and you want to create the next great experience for someone behind you or for the next market of clients that we may be entering. So when we entered the gaming space, right, somebody said, I see a gap. Or as we entered our human X space with like consumer health and fitness, right, we saw a gap. And so this is how this is how new business areas within the firm get built out. So I think being able to build a book of business, strong senior client relationships, identifying and filling some of the strategic gaps within the firm, three big things I look at. And when I think it's some of the senior managing directors, they built practices from scratch that turned into really successful entities within our firm. Yeah. And of course, all the politics, right? You have to, at some level, you're like appointed to some of these levels. So you have to get a lot of senior support within the firm. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think politics definitely has a lot to play with. But your point is well taken. Like you're an owner of the firm. I think that's what people are looking for. Like who is a good steward of the firm, who is building a better future. And one of the things I think is that I probably didn't realize. And when I early joined in, this may be asking one of the questions as well, is that actually everyone within the company is an entrepreneur in some way. Like everyone is fighting for work, fighting for results, and building things, building a practice, and bringing people along. So when you get to the top, you need to be shown that like an entrepreneur, you've taken something that you were either given or you created, and then you've grown it and developed value off it, and you can quantify how much value that you've been given. So another good tip that I give people all through the firm from top to bottom is essentially when you want to do something, you need to start doing it ahead of you. You don't ask to do it, you do it. And then if you want to continue doing it, and maybe that's all you want to do, just say, well, if I don't do this anymore, we'll lose X much business, or this won't happen. So I have to be doing that. So support me to do more of that, because this is really important. So it's almost your business case is always, and anyone joining my team is they come in, they build themselves a piece of the practice. Maybe it's an industry area like it was a blockchain. You start doing blockchain before someone's asked you to do blockchain. You build it, you get people around you, you start creating a movement, creating momentum. And this may be your side hustle alongside your original job. And then actually, when you want to move into your side hustle full time, you say, well, someone needs to do this. I can't do two things at once, or typically it's 4 or 5 things at once. So support me to do this so we don't lose it. And that's typically the way you end up building new things within the practice. And when you get to the top, it's that you've built that thing, and it's become so large that people can quantify the value add. And also the strategic ad, which is harder to quantify, but then also talks the fact that you understand where the firm is going and what your part and role is to play in that.
Yeah, and I'll just add, of course, you guys are closer to this, so have more experience than I have. But like one thing I've also seen is just the important. So of course, a lot of C-suite positions are external facing, right? So the ability to be able to be the face of the company, right? And that comes down even to stuff as basic and maybe trivial as presentation, right? But how do you, like, when you're sort of speaking of the company, do you show that passion we've spoken about? Are you able to articulate what it does? Are you a good champion externally? And I've, in my experience, I've seen many people who maybe internally did the great work, but the inability to sort of be that external face maybe has kept others from empowering them to, play those roles.
Final word, applying to a role in consulting. So one, if you think you're interested in it, absolutely just apply. There's so many different things you can do within a consulting firm, and it may surprise you, but take the time to do a little bit of research, figure out a couple of interesting areas, and just start somewhere.
Yeah, and for me, I just say, relationships, right? And that's all. Do the work, but also, build the relationships, because you need the two to succeed.
Yeah, and to echo those points, it's certainly there are many different paths in, and anyone from any background can come in and do some stuff. That's the beauty of it. It's about how you adapt and work when you're in the consultancy, and how do you show that you're that sort of growth mindset person, and all the things we discussed before. So there's no one I think could not do consulting in some way, shape, or form if they apply themselves. And so fear not if you're thinking, but good luck if you are, and definitely reach out, build those relationships, and get started.